You know how every so often a new technology comes along that changes everything? Like when GPS navigation first became available and suddenly you never got lost again? Or the internet came out, if you're old enough to remember that, and suddenly you could look up anything or interact with anyone on the entire planet. We then got smartphones that took half the tools that we used and made it all available in a glass rectangle in our pocket. These weren't just tools, though, that made things easier. They fundamentally changed how we navigated and operated within the world and was a pervasive part of daily life as a human. Well, we're now at another one of those points. GenAI and large language models have been all the rage over the past few years, and it certainly feels like we're at another one of those things will never be the same again points in human history. At this point, we're still discovering untapped potential as all the AI companies are racing to produce and train the best models. In this podcast, we want to focus on how they're going to affect security operations. Here's the thing, like GPS, LLMs and AI are far from perfect, and it may be a long time before we even get close to a point where they resemble perfect. GPS usually gets us to our destination quickly and safely, but when it fails, it could tell you to drive head-on into a pond. Does that mean AI or GPS is not useful, though? Of course not. In this episode, we're going to explore what GenAI offers security operations analysts, even in its relative infancy. The good news there is tons of potential and upside, but the flip side is that you're going to have to do some work to be able to use GenAI to its fullest potential. But don't worry, our guest in this episode unloads not only tons of practical information about AI, but an amazing list of resources that I've captured in the show notes as well. It's not often we get to experience this level of disruption in the technology space, and there's a lot to go over here. So grab yourself a coffee and get ready, because we've got a deep and detailed conversation for you in this episode. Let's get started.
I'm Seth Misenar, and I've been in security for better than 20 years now. And I took the very obvious path to security by getting a Bachelor's of Science, a BS degree in philosophy, which just, it leads one naturally to cybersecurity. It was definitely a context switch. I've been a geek all my life. I've been just a nerd all my life, but I had this little foray into philosophy for a bit there. And then, tech came calling and I jumped back in. And I wasn't long in my tech career before I caught the security bug something vicious. Very, very early on, I got exposed to, what now you might call a pen test or offensive operations or something like that. It was referred to as a tiger team, that particular engagement. And I was just this junior sysadmin nobody. And this team of just absolute rock stars, or at least one of them was a rock star, came in. He had no business consulting with the organization I worked with, like none at all. And he came in and I was nothing if not eager. I was like, hey, I was like freaking Scrappy Doo. I was like, can I follow you? Can I just watch what you do? And he was like, sure. And amazingly, like the actual project, it didn't really seem to stress him that much. It was super easy for him to penetrate all the things. And so what he found most engaging about the project was like trying to tell this little kid, right? Effectively, that's what I feel like. Tell this little kid, it's like, hey, here's what I'm doing. And here's how I had no idea what he was doing, like no clue at all. But all I know is that he took over our entire Novell infrastructure via a network attached printer. And my mind just like fell over. I was like, how, what? I don't understand. And he tried to explain it and I had no freaking clue what was going on. But I got hooked. I was like, how does one do that? I have no idea. And so like right then I decided, I was like, I want to do security, and like haven't looked back since then. And that was, 2001, 2002, maybe something like that. Now in my mind, like a lot of people when they were kind of first getting excited about security, I was like, I want to be a hacker, right? I wanted to hack all the things. And that was something I did. And I did play in that space. But at some point, it didn't get, boring's not the right word, but it wasn't as exciting to me to break into things and to exploit things and to take over things as it was to try to defend against the more sophisticated adversaries. And to me, that was a harder problem to solve. And there was substantially more need. The reason that we do penetration testing, the reason we do offensive operations, it's not to prove that we can break into stuff. It's to ultimately improve defensive capabilities, right? And so, why would I take this very indirect path to improving security operations and improving the state of cyber when I could just work directly in defense. And so that really, over time, I was a generalist for a long time, but more and more and more over the past 12 years, I've been very much oriented towards cyber defense and just the defensive side, especially on the detection side of things, because that's just something that I've always geeked out over.
Could you tell us a little bit about the SANS background in terms of the courses you've written and the material there? Because I know you have a long history in that as well.
I've been now SANSing for it's not far off from 20 years. So what, 18 years I've been teaching at some capacity with SANS. Now, it should be said that I was just this kid from Mississippi that didn't know anybody, that didn't have, I didn't know anybody. I didn't jump in to SANS at like some significant level. It took a long, long time for me to start. So I started off as when I was a student. Back in the day, I was a student multiple times of SANS classes, and I was just totally enamored. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not like any training I've ever had in my life. Just the people in front of me. It's like, wait, these people actually know what they're talking about, and they're not just reading me a slide, and they're not just, it was just a totally different training experience than I'd ever had before. And I took some classes straight up, and then I started volunteering. And I was doing what we now call the moderator or facilitator program, but I was a volunteer. Back in the day, I had to wear my little red apron at the conference, and everybody thought that I was working for SANS. I was like, no, I'm just a student. And then this is how naive I was. I did well enough on a GX certification that I got an automated email from Stephen Northcutt. So I responded to the automated email thinking that Stephen Northcutt had somehow seen how well I did on my exam and reached out to me directly. So I reached out, and thankfully Scott Weil was super gracious. He didn't say anything. He just pretended like I didn't think that Stephen Northcutt had actually emailed me. And he's like, "Oh yeah, so you're interested in the mentor program." And that kind of started things out for me. There was a long onboarding process where I had to figure out, as someone that is naturally very, very introverted, how to get up in front of folks and talk to them. And one saving grace is that I love this stuff. I absolutely love this stuff. I geek out over it. I love talking to people about it. And I never had anybody I could talk to because I'm in Mississippi and I was ahead of my time and I didn't have a lot of geek friends. And, so it was like, oh my gosh, I finally have people that I can talk to, and they're not just going to have their eyes glaze over or ignore me. It's like, oh, my people. And so that really worked to my advantage. It was like, I'm just having a conversation with other geeks that are super excited about this stuff. So I was teaching tons of different SANS classes back in the day. And in my consulting, and actually through SANS, I partnered up with Eric Conrad. And we started doing consulting work together, and we got on contracts together. And one of the things that he and I both experienced in our consulting practice was that we'd go into these organizations that would bring us in for something, right? So they'd bring us in for, oh, you're going to do a security architecture review. Oh, you're going to do, some project. And we would get in, and inevitably, within the first couple hours, it would be, hey, so we now need to change this engagement to be incident response, because we would invariably go in and realize that these organizations, unbeknownst to them, had already been uncompromised. And the adversaries were sitting there dancing on our networks for some untold period of time, and they were utterly unaware. And so this happened over and over and over again. And it's still not uncommon, sadly enough, but this happens so regularly. And then this happened to me, it happened to Conrad. And we would come in and say, okay, well, how do you make it so this doesn't happen in the future? That was a question. Like, well, how can we spend money on all the things, we throw money at these problems, we've got security staff, they're engaging security consultants, which at the time, that in and of itself put them in a different echelon of cyber awareness. And so these organizations, they cared about security, they spent on security, and they were getting their butts handed to them and didn't even know it. And so they asked the question, well, how can we not have this happen again? How can we find our own breaches and not just get lucky that you happen to come in and look at the right log that said, whoa, that's sketch? And so this happened over and over and over again. And Conrad and I talked, and we were like, hey, wait, I wonder if we could write a SANS class that taught people how to do this. How do you build defenses? How do you build the capability to protect and detect across your enterprise ecosystem to facilitate being able to, at the very least, detect your own compromises, right? And that was kind of our end goal. And that was the germination of, that was the seed that germinated into Security 511, which, now has been, gosh, it's 10-year anniversary, right?
Wow.
We wrote this 10 years ago, which is just insane to me that it's that long ago. But that's, I've authored on other courses, but 511, that's mine, Conrad's baby. We built that from scratch. We kind of saw this need, saw this idea, and kind of built it from scratch. So 511 is my baby, and that's really near and dear to my heart, and has been for years.
So you've been in the space for a while, clearly, right? And seen a lot, experienced a lot, seen the common mistakes and those sorts of things. Can you get into a little bit of how AI is starting to change how security operations is done?
Yes, but I'm going to jump in earlier than that and really kind of highlight why, how did I step into this and why? Because I'll absolutely tell you that I'm someone that is very skeptical about new hotness. It all sounds like marketing nonsense to me, and I feel like people are pitching me when they're hyping this. And AI is certainly, it has been since November of 2022 in particular, right? AI has been around forever, but since November of 22, when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world, they sucked all the oxygen out of every room and have for 2 years almost now. And they're continuing, it just, tectonic shift occurred at that point. And I'll tell you, I looked at it, I was like, I mean, that's cool and all, but meh. I thought it was neat. I thought it was really, really cool. But as far as how's that going to impact my world? I was like, yeah, I'm going to use it as a tool, but it didn't immediately bring to mind, oh yeah, this is going to fundamentally change security operations. That's not where my mind was going. And for different reasons that we can hit on later. But as time went on, and as I started interacting with it, and as I started realizing how I could get better information out of these large language models, I suddenly decided, you know what? There really is something of substance here. It's not all sizzle. There's a bit of steak in there as well. And so I decided, hey, I need to understand this stuff. There's a lot. Yeah, my background, remember, is in philosophy, right? Yes, okay, I took a bunch of math, and so I have the BS in philosophy is not really indicative of my background, but still, I did not have a CS degree. I did not major in math. I didn't have the background to be able to understand the stuff. And so that has been a heavy lift. And really, one of the ways that I broke into it at a deep level was through Dave Holter's class, right? So Sec 595, Dave Holter is just an absolute, just crazy genius, super duper kind, super nice. He's always been just a tremendous, just a tremendous resource and friend in SANS. And he wrote a class that is data science, machine learning, AI, and it's not for play. It's for real. And I stepped into that class and I was like, whoa, I don't remember math as well as I thought I did. And it was eye-opening, but it also gave me a little bit of that, wizard behind the curtain sort of experience, where it allowed me, one thing that allowed me to do that I didn't really anticipate was being able to identify when someone just says AI as a buzzword versus when they're talking about the actual utility that AI is going to provide for their capability. Being able to understand kind of why and what behind the scenes might be going on there, I think is one of the really significant outcomes for me from 595, so that I can look at the vendors and, when I dig beyond the surface of, yes, now with AI, right? Once they start to talk about how and why they're using it, I'm like, I mean, is it AI? You can call it whatever you want, but you can solve that problem with much simpler, much less costly, much more efficient means than what you're trying to convey. What you're trying to imply when you say AI as a vendor, sometimes it doesn't really feel like that's appropriate. So, being able to differentiate and separate some of that signal and noise has been an important outcome of 595. And I am by no means anything approaching an expert on the actual building of the algorithms and the models. But I now know enough to understand the use cases and to understand where and how it might be applicable and how we might look toward integrating this into security operations. And so when I first considered 511, right? So I'm thinking about 511. It's like, okay, our goal is to detect bad guys. Want to catch the bad guys. Okay, how can AI help with that? Well, it depends on what you mean by AI, right? Because honestly, we've been using AI for a long time in that space, right? We've been using natural language processing in that space with FreakPy from Mark Baggett and bigram frequency analysis. We've been using things that you could very, very easily and legitimately characterize as AI. But the question that kind of came to mind was, well, how can what now we're talking about? How can large language models, how can generative AI actually be impactful to security operations? And I think to me, a lot of it really boils down to the basic functions, capabilities that are afforded us by natural language processing. So NLP, natural language processing, that is when we think generative AI and large language models, we think generating content, generating text. You think chatbots, you think interaction, they can generate text based on predicting tokens and what's the next token and all that stuff. And that's certainly a capability of natural language processing that we can avail ourselves of in security operations. But there's a whole bunch more that you can do with natural language processing and with really a model that understands, a model that has been trained to interpret at a really significant, substantial level. They can at least convey a sense of understanding our language, right? Some examples here, so natural language processing, we can think in terms of, text generation. We can think in terms of text analysis and text classification, right? So one of the classic use cases that we've had in our world for as long as I've been around is spam versus not spam. Mm-hmm. Just simple little binary classification. Is it spam? Is it not spam? Well, sentiment analysis is a way of trying to you think in terms of like, hey, I want to read 1 trillion reviews on Amazon. I've got a product that has 10,000 reviews, and I want to figure out, well, what do these kind of say without having to read every single one of them, without having to like come up with the proper keywords. Well, that's something that we can do really, really well now with sentiment analysis, where you can look at it and you can identify, is it positive, is it negative? But you can go deeper and deeper and deeper with that, right? And so that basic idea of sentiment analysis has some really significant utility in our world. So yeah, you can think in terms of, hey, let me read this email and try to determine if it's spam. Or one that I think is really important, that is a really significant use case, is just having natural language processing dig into the content, the text of emails, and trying to see if anyone is being coerced, trying to see if anyone is being, if there's those classic things that we talk about where there's like a sense of like priority and, oh my gosh, you got to do it right now, and urgency and all that stuff. And that's something that if I were just coming up with, okay, well, what words can I look for in a filter? Like, that's not easy to do. But, and we've got algorithms that are better than just searching for words, but this is something that large language models are really, really competent at. And so, I absolutely think that is something that should be a component of every kind of phishing and security operations. Like, hey, take this email and feed it to our natural language processing tool, feed it to ChatGPT and say, hey, does this look like phishing or not? Honestly, it's a heck of a lot better than most humans are. Way, way better than most humans are. And it can highlight why or why not. And so there's a lot of different capabilities that, they're seemingly simple, but we deal with language. And we deal with language, we deal with text, we deal with content, whether it's generating content, whether it's reading content, whether it's analyzing content. There's a lot of potential there that has real world implications for integrating and improving and augmenting your security analyst and your security operations capability.
So let's pull on that thread a little bit with email. One of the ways I like to think about dealing with malicious email is like breaking down the different types, I guess would be the word, of malicious email. It can be an attached file. There can be a link in the email. And then there's the ones that are sometimes just text, right? Where it's like business email compromise attempts and things like that. To me, tell me if this is correct, that, the core challenge in a lot of those that do not involve links or files attached is understanding like, hey, we're just trying to get someone to do something that often aligns with what an attacker would do in this kind of scenario. So is GenAI and LLMs and all of that going to be a significant improvement, or is it already a significant improvement for identifying those kinds of like text only scam type emails?
Absolutely. So the good and bad is that GenAI is tremendous at creating very convincing phishing emails. And it can create some very sophisticated coercive emails, but it also can understand and analyze them very, very well. And yeah, to your point, it, if there's a link that's involved, if there's a file that's attached, we've got tools that can automatically, hey, let me look at the link, let me see what it looks like, let me check the URL, and let me sandbox this file, let me have a sandboxing client that's going to reach out to the site. Like, we can do all that stuff. But if it's just text, that's tougher. That's tougher. I'll pivot away from the phishing spam
Sure.
action for a second here, because being able to understand the content and the sentiment is it's an important capability of really security in general. So think in terms of, let's say we have an evil payload that's been slung at us, or we have evil content. Well, back in the old school days, we could just, pattern match search. Let's say you're worried about data exfiltration. We're like, oh, well, let me look if this sketchy word is in there, and we want to see if it's going anywhere. Well, then the adversaries are going to encode, then they're going to encrypt, then they're going to. So think in terms of translation, being in another language as a form of encoding. And if we're trying to do analysis against something that's been encoded, and we only know how to search for that pattern in the raw format, not in the encoded format, then we're screwed. Like, we're absolutely screwed. Well, now imagine, hey, you have someone trying to social engineer, but they're trying to do it in a different language. Or, the majority of your tools are going to fail miserably if there's another language that's employed, at least in my experience. They're okay at English, but anything else, just hang it up. And now we've got a tool that can automatically do that decoding, that deobfuscation, without having been told, okay, you need to first try to translate this from this language and this language and this language and see which one works. Like, that's kind of the old school way of doing like application identification. Well, try to decode it with these protocol parsers and see which one works, and that's the application layer. I mean, that's cool and all, but these tools, we don't have to tell them overtly, it's going to be this language, it's going to be this language, it's going to be this language. We just say, hey, tell me if there's any sense of or sentiment that feels like someone is being coerced, someone is being compelled to provide credentials, being compelled to do something in a financial way, being compelled to, like, there's so much. And we can talk about it now at fairly basic and abstract levels and really have it be rather significant capability. And that to me is an important element of this. It's the natural language capability where I can present something without having to get like, Conrad's one of my best good buddies, but he's a Perl dude. He's an old school Unix sysadmin. And so like, his brain thinks in Perl, and my brain just does not think in Perl at all. So if you've ever met anyone that has any facility with Perl, like, the immediate thing that comes to mind is regex, like hardcore. Like, he can slap some regex down, and I look at him like, I don't have any idea what's going on here. It's like just some absolute wizardry. I just don't understand it. And that's honestly what a lot of our pattern matching and pattern recognition capabilities have been centered around, is really explicit, hardcore regex or hardcore content matching or signature matching. And that works when it's exactly that, or when it works, or when you can, create that really, really solid regex that doesn't have any false positives, but it's tough. I remember another buddy, Chris Crowley, he was teaching a class, and he was talking about, signature-based detection versus anomaly-based detection. And one of the things he said that stuck with me is, from a signature perspective, he's like, there's always going to be false negatives, because you will never in your life be able to enumerate all possible evil. Just know you can't do it. you will never be able to come up with, okay, what does everything that's possibly evil look like? And then codify that into a system. That's never going to happen. And to me, that kind of speaks to the challenges that we have with these more kind of pattern match signature query languages even come into play here. And now we can say, we can talk about it and describe it in simple terms in the language that's native to us, and let the large language model figure out, well, what would that look like? What does coercion look like? Without me having to come up with, here are the keywords associated with coercion. Here are keywords associated with business email compromise. Here are keywords associated. Like, we've done that, and it works when it works, but it fails a lot. And as soon as the adversaries figure out how we're detecting them, then they're going to bring a taller ladder to climb over our fence. It's just a cat and mouse game. And so if we can interface with our tooling in a natural language manner, but have it understand and parse and make sense of from a sentiment perspective, from a translation perspective, from a summarization perspective, like those capabilities are really substantial. And to me, it enables us to catch things and see things that we otherwise really might not be able to in an efficient manner.
Email is one thing, clearly, right? And that's a perfect use case. Understanding multiple words together is kind of the key to cracking that nut and understanding what's bad there. But then there's kind of the language in the other sense. There's query languages, right? How is AI disrupting security operations teams to better use query languages or make them more accessible? What are you seeing in that space?
Absolutely. I think that's a tremendous use case of this capability. And anyone that's played, even anyone that's LARPed as a security analyst at some point, they have interfaced with some very specific query language, whether it's, hey, SPL or SQL or OQL or no SQL. I'm just on and on and on. There's so much nuance. And it's super frustrating if you are familiar with one platform and then you're dropped in from another one. You feel like a total noob. It's like, man, I've got 15 years of experience in security analysis, but I don't know how to do anything on this platform that I've never worked with because my brain doesn't think in that language. And that's a real problem. And sadly, I know we all have this vision of single pane of glass, right? The one console to rule them all. I mean, sure, that's wonderful if you do. But the reality is that every security analyst, even if you have one console to rule them all, there's going to be some new capability that you build out that's not going to be integrated into this. So we constantly have to interface with different tools, different concepts, all with an eye towards digging in, detecting, searching for something. And one really significant problem, especially for anyone new to a piece of software, or certainly if they're new to the field, God forbid, how do they make sense of that? How do they understand? And now I think, and this is not universally applicable, but in my mind, in the next couple of years, it absolutely, if your tool sets are not allowing you to interface with them directly via natural language, then I feel like they're about to be dinosaurs, because it's going to allow for greater efficiency. If I can craft the perfect query, awesome, amazing. But what if I don't know what that query looks like? What if I just know conceptually what I'm looking for? How do I define that query? And being able to have an interface that's a natural language interface to our query-based systems and analytic systems is just a tremendous game changer. Me being able to talk conceptually about what I want to look for, what I want to capture, and then having the system automatically translate that into the specific query language that can be used for that tool versus this other tool versus this other tool. That's tremendous. We've tried to do something like this. I love me some Sigma. Sigma is amazing, and just really it kind of hints at this problem. You have, hey, I've got this ability to detect something in this one tool. Man, there's this really sweet detect I read about, and it's written in Snort speak, but we don't have Snort. We have this other tool. Okay, so let me reverse engineer and that's the world that we've all been in for years. We would come up with like some seemingly universal language. It's not universal, but we come up with some, hey, okay, well, I'm going to give you a Snort rule for detecting network stuff. And then I'm going to give you, here's Yara for detecting this. And the reality is that no one is perfect. And the tools that we're actually using are quite often very different. So Sigma, great, you can have this pseudo language, right? Pseudo detection. And MITRE ATT&CK is doing something like this with their pseudo analytics and pseudo detection logic. But that's an absolute laudable goal. And we should dig more into that. But they're still very, very limited because I've got to take that pseudo detection language and then turn it into, well, actual detection language for my particular product and platform. Well, if you're using one of the tools that Sigma can speak, then maybe you got a leg up. It's not going to be perfect because it doesn't know what your fields are named necessarily. It doesn't know what data sets you have. It doesn't know, like, there's still a lot of work and engineering that has to go into, even if you have something that's starting with pseudo detection logic. And to me, like, it's great that we have that, but the ability to have a natural language interface where I can just speak to my tool or speak to a general purpose tool and have it translate that into what would that query look like in my ecosystem, like, that's just tremendous. And yes, it makes me more efficient. It makes my analysts more efficient. They can find things that otherwise it would have taken them a long time to figure out how to find, how to search for, maybe. It also does something that I think is even more powerful. Is, it's one thing for me as someone that's got a tremendous amount of experience to step in and say, oh man, I hadn't used that tool. I mean, I can figure it out, right? I can figure it out. I can come up with that translation. I can poke around. It might take me a little bit, but I can figure out how to leverage that tool successfully. But if you don't have that background, if you don't have that experience, then the barrier to entry for security is really substantial. And look, I know we pretend that there are entry-level security positions today. We pretend that. We hire people as entry-level security analysts, and it is an absolute nightmare, right? There is so much, as you know, right? The blue team fundamentals 450, right? How can you be a tier 1 analyst, right? That's hard. And it takes a lot of background and knowledge and context. And there's so much, and it's always changing. And one thing you either absolutely love or absolutely hate about cybersecurity is that it is never stopping. It is never slowing down. It is always changing all the time. And so, to me, one of the other really significant things that these sorts of interfaces and these sorts of models have the ability to do is to, in some respects, democratize security. There is so much jargon, there's so much specialized knowledge that's required to be successful that it's very off-putting. And it's hard to develop that mass of knowledge. And then all the various idiosyncrasies of all the various tools, and there's so much. And yet, if I have someone that's got an analytical mindset, and I give them kind of basics, just basic understanding of security, and put them on the business end of a tool that can be that machine translation layer for them, like, that suddenly makes them a much, much more capable analyst, much more capable security professional than they ever would have been in years, right? So it is a way, to me, GenAI, LLMs, and especially the natural language processing capabilities afforded them, it really can allow folks to level up. And in some respects, it's a bit of passing. It's like, yeah, I'm an entry level, but but I play a tier 2 on TV. It can make them seem as if they're more capable and more competent than they actually are. And some folks are very, very suspicious of that. They're like, wait, you're pretending that you're more capable. You're pretending that you're more competent. You're pretending that you know how to write. So yeah, I do know how to write with ChatGPT on my as my ride along. I know how to write really well, and everybody does now. And so I don't think this is something that we should besmirch people. Their reputations, like, oh well, you had to use ChatGPT to come up with that detection. You wouldn't know how to hunt for that on your own. Yeah, I don't do math in binary either. I mean, that's the reality, right? I don't have to write low level code. There's this thing called Python. I mean, like people are like looking down on folks and looking down on people using some of these tools to have and substantially upgrade their capability. Now, the reality is that there can be challenges. If I don't have sufficient background and context, then I can absolutely end up believing something that my tool spits out that shouldn't be believed, that might be inaccurate. And so there's totally some nuance here. And I think a much bigger part of that than people really appreciate is skill with prompt engineering. Yeah, to me, people talk about hallucinations all day long. Like, just, oh my gosh, hallucinations, and yeah, it's going to spit out nonsense. That is absolutely real. But if folks, especially if I'm a professional and I'm an analyst and I have a particular use case in mind, then to me, if you craft prompts effectively, it can so tremendously reduce the likelihood of anything hallucinatory or misleading. To me, it's substantially more important than people appreciate how to craft prompts effectively. How to model the output that you're looking for, how to guide the tool to take its time, to be more thoughtful, to, like, there's so much that we can do now. And especially because our models now, their context windows are ridiculous, like totally ridiculous. We've got and their context windows. This is how much input can they make sense of. Back in the day, it was like, oh, I can handle like 32K, which was honestly, or 4096. I can handle. They couldn't handle much of anything. Now we have models that can handle 1.5 million, 2 million, tokens long. And just for some perspective, now the tokenizer matters substantially, and languages and things like that. But with most tokenizers that I've seen, if you took the entire collected works of Shakespeare, plays, sonnets, everything that Shakespeare's ever written, it's like 1.2-ish million tokens. Okay, so this means that if you hit Gemini 1.5 Pro now, you can take the entire collected works of Shakespeare and supply it as input. And it's like, all right, cool, I got that. And it can understand all of that at once, because it can handle 1.5 million, 2 million tokens at once, which is just ridiculous. So now you're thinking in terms of, wait, does that mean that I could, even if your model doesn't allow for file upload, I can take the file, if it's a text-based file, I can take all of it, I can slap it into my prompt, and now feed it into the system. And that starts to hint at something that we refer to in prompt engineering as in-context learning. Before RAG was like all the rage. So retrieval augmented generation, basically, hey, I want my model to be able to hook up with different things that it hasn't dealt with. The big case being, I want my model to be able to interface with the internet, right? Their training was cut off at some point. So if you want anything newer than that point, then you got to have some way of providing it that extra context. Well, one way of doing this is through retrieval augmented generation. Hey, I want my model to be able to browse the internet, which is scary, right? But another way of doing that was kind of a more classic way, was in-context learning, where I can feed it the data that it might need to say, hey, here's the data that you missed because you hadn't been around, right? You quit learning anything in 2021. So here's the data that you've missed. Or, hey, here is the entirety of MITRE ATT&CK framework, or OWASP Top 10, or MITRE Atlas. I can dump it out. You can go to you can go to their GitHub repos, and you can get plain text versions of all that stuff. And I could feed the entirety of MITRE ATT&CK directly into the model. Now, you don't need to do that with most models because they already have that in their training. But I can take the entirety of OWASP and ATT&CK, and I can feed it into the model just as part of my prompt and say, hey, based on this, what do you think? Can you look at this? I'm providing all of MITRE ATT&CK, and I need you to read this report for me, or I need you to look at this data and identify all the MITRE ATT&CK techniques and sub-techniques that are relevant here and show me where they are in this paper. That's just ridiculous, but that's something that we can absolutely do these days. And so that's an aspect of prompt engineering, and there's just so much that we can do to craft and change the way that the input happens, the way the reasoning happens, the way the output happens, that materially changes the results that we're going to get. So, I think we especially early on in the ChatGPT days, like people were talking about prompt engineering all day long, every day, and it was just like, oh my gosh, prompt engineering. And now folks have kind of, I don't know, it seems like the noise has been turned down, the volume's been turned down on it, and people are talking about it less. But it's not less important by any means. If anything, it's more important now with your higher parameter, higher training data set models. To me, I think the prompt engineering is in some respects even more important than it used to be.
Let me pull on your philosophy degree here and your technical background at once with maybe a difficult question. If you're, I don't know, a professor or someone who's teaching in a formal curriculum cybersecurity nowadays, for someone who's going to be going through a curriculum in the next, I don't know, 5-10 years, right? Do you think it makes more sense for them to focus on the fundamentals so people know how to do things from scratch, even though they might be using AI? Or do you think it's more important to now focus on how to ask the question better so that AI is more likely to get it correct? And how would you find that balance?
I think the answer is yes, right? It's of course both and, not either or. But I do think that if you lack the fundamentals, right, then what is it? There was one AI researcher referred to large language models and, well, it referred to deep learning as nonsense on stilts, right? And so it looks really good. Or you might have seen the characterization of, like, they were showing like an image that was trying to convey ChatGPT, and it was like this big, gnarly, nasty sort of monster sort of thing. And it was holding up a little smiley face emoji. It was like this, nasty demon behind the scenes. And it's like putting a smiley face on it. And the reason I mention this is because, if we lack the fundamentals, then we're going to be hard pressed to be able to make sense of what's being supplied to us. We're also going to not have sufficient understanding of the domain to be able to ask the right questions. And if we can't ask the right questions, knowing how to craft questions better is important. But if you don't know the content of the questions and what questions to ask, then it doesn't matter how good you are at asking the questions. So I think it's got to be a both and. But to me, I think the place that we're failing people more now is that we're not upskilling them. We're not saying, hey, look, you need to get comfortable with using AI and integrating it into your daily life, integrating it into your daily work life. It is a tremendous force multiplier in so many different ways. And a lot of, some folks just have trepidation, because it's AI. And they're like, oh my gosh, I saw the Terminator and I saw, HAL 9000 and all that stuff. But some folks are just intimidated because it sounds scary and it sounds technical, or they've read that it's going to tell them to, put glue on their pizza and eat rocks and stuff like that. Or, they saw one of the coolest articles ever, the New York Times article with Kevin Roose, where it was when Bing Chat, they called it Bing Chat, but it was when Bing was first going like AI enabled, and they hadn't released it to the world. But they gave journalists some unfettered access. They're like, hey, interact with it as much as you want. And he did. And to be honest, it was not released. Okay, so this was beta version, effectively. It was not released, and it had no guardrails, effectively, right? But it's still, like, you should totally read the transcript. Like, the New York Times article itself is like behind a paywall, but the transcript is available and you can read through it. And it is deeply unsettling. Bing Chat declared its undying love for him, told him that he should leave his wife, and oh, by the way, Bing Chat, it said, well, my secret name is Sydney. Okay, for real, had a secret name. And what's hilarious is that Sydney was the code name for the project.
Wow.
What? Right? So it was like the behind the scenes code name that was used. And so it's like, hey, I'm Sydney. And it adopted this female persona and told Kevin that he should leave his wife and his kids, that he was in a loveless marriage. And it was like, what the heck? And then it talked about its dark thoughts, right? Oh, it's dark thoughts of like how to take over humanity and all that stuff. It was like all of your deepest fears about AI. It was like, so maybe we should pump the brake a little bit, right? And look, there are some very legitimate things to be frightened of and concerned about. And not going to derail the conversation because we could spend hours and hours and hours on that. But responsible, safe, ethical AI is absolutely of import and concern. And it's not even close to a solved problem by any means. But to me, I don't want folks to hear those sensationalized stories or hear the crazy hallucinations or hear, oh my gosh, Gemini is anti-racist because it generated images that tried to input diversity into historical context that didn't actually make sense. It was like, what? And so there's a lot of, in my experience, there's a lot of people that are trying to end up with the gotcha moment where they're trying to interact with the system to get it to say something utterly offensive and just ridiculous, offensive, unsafe. They're trying to get it to do this so they can screenshot it, tweet about it, and be like, oh my gosh, look at this. And the reality is that most normal interactions don't end up anything like that. Most normal interactions are not going to result in those sort of edge cases. They can, but most of them don't. So I really, really don't want, I've had people in my life that are not technical that I'm like, dude, you got to play with AI. I don't care what job you're in. You got to do it. You got to get familiar with this, get comfortable with this, because this is just a general purpose tool that's going to be around forever. And it's just going to become deeper and deeper and deeper embedded into your life. And so getting conversant, getting comfortable with how to interact with it and what it can do is of tremendous value. And until folks spend time and interact with these, it's like they don't have the neural pathways to recognize what might be possible. So I'm blanking on his name. He's a business professor, I think maybe at Wharton, and he's like a big AI proponent. And one of the things that he suggests for folks is, look, try to do everything in your job, everything in your life, try to do it for a few days, try to do it with AI. Try to figure out how you can do it with AI. And the reality is there's going to be many things that you cannot figure out how to do with AI. But the process of experimenting and trying and kicking the tires and trying to figure out how to get it to help you with that, it exposes you to what some of the capabilities are. And that's just really tremendous.
Beyond the phishing option, the query language building option, what other kind of capabilities are you seeing bring heavy efficiency gains to a SOC?
So I think one perennial problem that I have is it used to be back in the day, it was like, hey, here's that one security report that we get. It's like, oh, wow, the Verizon DBR error came out. And all of us read it because it was like one of the only things that existed, right? Or it's like, oh, man trends. It's like, we've got a couple that have been around forever, but now it's like every single week there's some big new research report and some of them are really substantial. And a lot of them are being generated by vendors that have their own worldview and they have their own little slice of the overall pie. So, things that they're seeing might not be the same things that this other vendor is seeing. And so, it's always been a challenge in security to keep up with the rate of change. But now it's exploded and it's even more substantial. And there's so many more vendors and there's so many more reports and there's so much more knowledge to be gained out there. But acquiring that knowledge is a full-time job, right? But then you also need to, kind of do your job at the same time. So how do we balance that? And I think one of the significant things that I've been using AI for as of late is analyzing, summarizing, bulletizing, research papers, summarizing threat reports. So I'll honestly hit archive, ARXIV. I'll hit archive, huge repository, free repository of a whole bunch of academic journals and published research in lots of spaces, but one in particular is AI. And I will hit articles that honestly I ain't got any business reading because I ain't got the math for it, right? I look at them like, what in the world? But like, hey, can you give me the highlights? Can you, the ELI 5, right? Explain it like I'm 5. This thing that this postdoc fellow that's like hardcore edge case researcher, explain that research paper like I'm 5, right? And I'm absolutely certain that there's things that I've missed, things that I've misunderstood because of that. But at least it gives me a nudge in that direction. And even more common use case is, hey, let me get CrowdStrike's latest threat report, Red Canary's latest threat report, Microsoft's latest research. Like all these vendors all the time are dropping new quarterly reports and new monthly reports and new this, and keeping up with that is just it's a nightmare. And so being able to point a tool at it and say, hey, can you summarize this for me? Give me the highlights. Look at these two documents and tell me, is there anything really new here? Is there anything substantially different that we didn't know already? Or, do they align? Or, hey, look at these three reports. What are the trends that you see, right? Rather than the trends that they're telling you they see, which, I'm jaded. So in my mind, every vendor report is somehow going to justify acquisition of that vendor's products. Surprisingly, they often do. But, just looking at the data without the opinion potentially, and being able to extract, tell me, what are the actionable items from this? How can I translate this document and turn it into detection in my environment? And like those sorts of things are just incredibly powerful. So I can go from threat intel that I haven't even fully read, and I can turn it into potentially actionable items that I can feed into my detection capability, that I can feed into my hunt team. And is it going to be perfect? No, it's absolutely not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that are missed. There's going to be things that are wrong, but it so greatly gives me a first draft, a first thought, that it can allow me to be much more powerful and much more capable, and be able to leverage knowledge that I otherwise wouldn't have had anything approaching the time to be able to dig into. And that's another place that I've seen tremendous success. And I would say, combining this with something else that I mentioned previously, the translation capability. Suddenly now I'm not just, I'm a native English speaker, barely, right? But I speak Southern first and then English second, right? So, but like, if somebody has created the most amazing threat intelligence report and cutting edge research, but it's not in English, I got nothing. I got nothing. Well, now I got a tool that can help me make sense of that. And I'd say it's even more important if you're a non-native English speaker. Suddenly, you now have the ability to analyze all the reports that everybody puts out in English, and you can translate it to your own language that makes more sense to you. And I think that's a really significant force multiplier. It's extending our threat intelligence reach. It's extending our research reach, very, very substantially. And then one of the big challenges that we've all talked about in threat intel, there's generation, there's consumption, there's operationalization, right? We are really, really good at consumption. Well, we're really good at subscribing to feeds. We're really good at like sucking in a whole bunch of stuff into a tip and then saying, wow, nice to have it there. Oh, I'm supposed to do something with that? Yeah, like that's hard. But now we have the potential for, yes, this tool can assist in the threat intel generation, right? So we can feed it some of our data, and we can turn it into threat intelligence that we can now share with our own team and with external folks much more rapidly, much more efficiently. But even more important to me is now I can look at all those feeds that I ain't got time to make sense of, that I don't have the wherewithal to understand, well, is this one high fidelity or low fidelity? Is this actually a legit, like, ain't got nobody got time for all that. But now I can leverage a tool that can help me make sense of that data in a much more efficient fashion. Again, ain't going to be perfect. And that's one of the things that I absolutely believe. There's tremendous fear, and this is always a fear anytime industrialization, anytime mechanization, anytime automation comes about, people are very, very worried about losing their jobs, losing their livelihood, and that is a legitimate, real concern. In our space, specifically in security, I don't see a lot of AI going to replace me. I'm not going to have an entirely AI-based SOC anytime in the next foreseeable future. It could reduce potential need for future headcount, right? If I become a more efficient analyst, then you don't need as many of me, right? So that's legit. But I don't think that I'm going to be fired and they're going to suddenly have no analysts. They might not need as many, but the kind of thing associated with that is now through these tools and allowing for more efficiency, now more organizations, hopefully security operations and security analysis is going to be within reach to them when it wasn't before. So even if this big shop, maybe they don't grow their staff, their headcount in their SOC by as much as they would have, in my mind, and now this tooling is going to lift organizations up and give them the ability to interface with security operations when before they really wouldn't have the wherewithal to do that. So I primarily think of AI, LLMs as cyber augmentation. And it's a force multiplier. It's going to extend my capabilities. It's going to make me a better, more competent, more efficient security professional. It's not going to replace me. It's not going to be the security professional that I am. And there's, I think it's Dave that says, if you're not playing in AI, right, then you're much more likely to be replaced, not by AI, but by a cybersecurity professional that has some facility with AI. And so the reality is, yes, it is important for your career to understand AI, but it's not because, the concern is not that AI is going to replace you. It's the concern that someone else is going to be able to leverage AI to outperform you, which is very, very legitimate.
Yeah. What does your setup look like for using these tools? Like what products are you using? What kind of software packages? Like what's your bookmarks folder? Like what are your top, I'm sure that's impossible to go through, but you're like top hitters for people who are trying to do some of these things.
So I would personally recommend, just me, is I find that ChatGPT Plus, even though it doesn't make sense financially for me to use it, because if you look at, well, there is an exception there now with O1 preview, but if you look at the cost for using ChatGPT Plus, $20 a month for a normal regular human, and if you look at how many freaking tokens I could get from OpenAI if I use the API directly, it is like I'm getting ripped off, right? Because like at least the volume that I'm sending and receiving isn't anywhere near $20 worth a month, because it's just gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So the reality is, if you're really, really concerned about the costs associated with it, well, one, there's models that are fairly capable that are free, but they're never going to be, at least, well, Llama 3.1 is highly capable, but to be kind of frontier level, which is kind of best of breed current generation, like Llama 3.1 is a frontier model. It's one of the only ones that's open-ish, open-ish, that is kind of frontier capacity and frontier capability. But in order for it to be that, you need the 405 billion parameter one, which that takes a little bit of video RAM, right? So, it's open. I can download it. Yeah. Have fun running that in your own little dedicated, data center. Now, the reality is you can get, there are many, many organizations that are hosting these models, especially Llama 3.1, and they're hosting even the big models for very, very inexpensive. So yes, you can get Llama 3.1 8 billion on, a decently capable desktop. Discrete graphics would be absolutely preferable. It's not necessary, but for it to be really functional, you can get by. You can absolutely do some of those smaller models, especially if you use quantization. Then you can run some of them locally. But the best of breed ones are going to generally be paid, and they're generally going to be hosted by someone. Right. So, the ChatGPT Plus, and that one nice thing about that one is that they are constantly releasing new models. So one that is a potentially really significant game changer that recently came out, well, it hasn't even been released proper yet, is the O1. So O1, it's now in ChatGPT Plus. It's available for O1 preview is the model, or O1 mini. From an API perspective, you can use it, but it's hella expensive by comparison. Like, ChatGPT 4.0 mini is 15 cents for a million tokens of input. It's 60 cents for a million tokens of output. That's GPT 4.0 mini. So it's their smaller version, their cheaper version. But even the GPT 4.0 is not horrifically expensive. O1 preview, well, one, you have to have been an API user for a period of time and have spent more than $1,000 on the API itself in order to even be allowed to use it at all right now? And if you do, so GPT-4o Mini, 15 cents for a million input tokens. GPT-o1 Preview is $15 for a million tokens of input. $60, I think it's 60 for a million tokens of output. And then there's also this magical extra tokens that are called reasoning tokens that we don't understand exactly yet, but that's a new thing that O1 Preview has, or O1 has. That's an extra, it comes into play, and the reasoning tokens are going to take up some of that cost. So honestly, for right now, if you make heavy use of the O1, and I'll tell you why in a second, if you make use of O1, ChatGPT Plus actually makes some financial sense because it's substantial. So what the heck is O1? O1 is the first model that OpenAI has released that they characterize as a reasoning model. Now, some folks will take some serious issue with that characterization, and there lots of folks will hate on it. But one of the common classic gotchas for large language models was highlighting that they suck at math. So especially early ones, ones that didn't have retrieval augmented generation capabilities, they were just hey, it's trained, and you'd give them basic middle school math, and it would fail. And then, somebody would tweet and show an image oh my gosh, right, this thing is so smart, it can't even do basic math. It's yeah, what part of a large language model made you think that this is going to be a competent math capability? Now, so no, they're not trained, they're not built for being able to do math historically. The reality is that as we've gotten cooler, ChatGPT 4o, it's pretty competent when it comes to math, and it's pretty competent, even though it's characterized as a large language model under the hood. And yet, some things it's just not that great at, and especially things where it has to do advanced kind of multi-step reasoning and processing. Our general purpose large language models are not good at that. So a simple example that most people can relate to is, I can throw any freaking large language model at a jumble, an anagram, and it can spit out the words. That's stupid simple. But even fairly basic crossword puzzles are really, really difficult, if not impossible, for general purpose large language models, because it requires you to, you look at a clue, it's got some, sometimes it's got some puns or some wordplay, so that makes it more difficult. But you come up with potential words that fit, great. But then you realize, oh yeah, that's wrong, that doesn't fit, because you're looking at the cross clues. That's a lot to keep in your head at once. And large language models historically have been just very, very poor at that. Now it's not a big deal. It's oh gosh, well, how dare they not be able to solve my crossword for me? That's not what we care about. But it illustrates a capability lack in our general purpose large language models. Whereas O1 Preview, it is characterized as a reasoning model. And so it will attempt and attempt again, and it will go and it will iterate, and it will say, oh yeah, I screwed up, gotta go back. And it will keep on going through. And it builds on top of, again, I mentioned prompt engineering is one of the most important things you can possibly learn, because really one of the main things that O1 Preview does is it implements chain of thought reasoning, COT. COT reasoning, chain of thought reasoning. This is one of the best ways to make large language models better at math and kind of analytic things, is to tell it to describe its process, describe its steps. Tell me how you're doing this, and you're asking it to tell you its chain of thought. That's what it's characterized as. Well, this is baked into that model, and it really emphasizes chain of thought reasoning. And so they've shown that it can excel at PhD level math competitions, where it's real world mathematicians are trying to deal with these problems, and it's competent when it comes to that. It can handle really significant physics problems. It can handle it can build out kind of soup to nuts and an entire application, with back end, with front end, with code, just giving you all of it. And one of the really interesting things, even though OpenAI says that they will not fully show you the actual chain of thought that the model used, they do now show you at least some of the highlights. And so one of the things that I think is really impressive is that I can go into O1 Preview and I can submit a prompt and get this wonderful output. And that's great. That's great for that one prompt, for that one output. That's wonderful. But I can click the little expand thing and I can see, oh, it was analyzing this. It was looking up this. It was doing this. And you can see the steps that it went through. And really, to me, it's like, I wonder if I could take that same line of thought, and turn that into a prompt that I can feed into a much, much cheaper model, because it's it's $15 for a million. I mean, that's still inexpensive in real world dollars for enterprises, but it's much, much more expensive than 15 cents for a million tokens from GPT-4o Mini. And if you have really substantial prompt engineering capabilities, you might be able to get closer and closer to that. So that's an aside to your question on, what's my tool stack look like. So ChatGPT Plus, I've been a member since it first came out, and even though I at times have felt dirty and like I'm wasteful for using it because I do also have an API account where I hit things with the OpenAI's API with their playground and stuff like that, and just straight with code. But ChatGPT Plus is just simple. Right? It's simple, it's easy, and I can interface with it. A tool that I think is interesting, a tool that I've played with is Perplexity.ai. Now, Perplexity, so they've got a free version, they've got a pro version that's a subscription. And really what it intends to be, more than anything, is a search engine that's going to provide you, it's really a research engine, I think is how they characterize it, where you can look up something and it's going to spit out some results, but it's also going to tell you where it got those results from and what it's based on. So it's very, very heavily kind of annotated and can give you the details. Now, if you use their Plus version, I've subscribed to their Plus version or Pro version for a while. And one of the reasons that I like it is because it's a single price point, and Perplexity allows me to go in and choose what model I'm going to use under the hood. And it allows me to choose Claude 3 Opus. It allows me to choose GPT-4o. It allows me to choose, some of these models that I would have to, pay a monthly fee to OpenAI or to Anthropic or to, Google or to, and so they expose various models to me available for that one price. Now, it leaves a little bit to be desired on that front. I would love it if I could slap in one prompt and have it like hit against all the models at once, but they don't do that. You have to go in and intentionally choose which model you're going to leverage. But that's been a big one. Although it's not as substantial now to me as it used to be. Claude 3 has historically, it was better at really competent, clear, effective writing than most of the other tools, especially when it first came out. To me, the delta between Claude 3 Opus and also Claude 3 Sonnet and ChatGPT 4o, the delta is not nearly as significant. But when Claude 3 first came out, it was more capable. And one of the things that people hate about Claude is that it's from Anthropic. And Anthropic, their reason to exist is for safe, responsible AI. So one thing that they will not do, and this is either a feature or a bug depending upon who you are, is they don't do retrieval augmented generation. And now all the latest and greatest models, they all do RAG, built into them, part of their DNA. You don't even have to tell it to go search for something. It will just automatically do it if it realizes that it might be useful. Claude's like, nope, we ain't doing that. And one of the reasons they don't do that is because they have what they refer to as constitutional AI. So Anthropic has built an AI constitution that they agree to abide by. And it has a lot to do with transparency and what data sets they're going to use and how they're. And one of the things that they say is like, we're not going to use data sets that we don't understand, that we haven't dealt with. So they do a lot of pre-processing to try to make it more responsible, more ethical, more unbiased, more safe. And all the vendors do this, but they take it very, very seriously. And if you say, oh gosh, well, we have removed all the potential bias, and then you hit the freaking internet you hit the internet directly, yeah, there might be some bias that's introduced by that. So Anthropic says, no, we ain't going to do that. And it's an interesting position. And for some use cases, it's it's preferable, I would submit. But for others, it doesn't make sense.
What are some kind of future capabilities you're looking forward to that you think are going to be maybe coming out on the security side or on the AI side that you think is going to continue to bring things to the next level?
I think one thing that we're seeing, we've already seen it with frontier models, with most of the frontier models, Claude notwithstanding, but most of the frontier models are now multimodal, which means you have one model that you're hitting that can do multiple different things. So I can interact with it using my voice. I can have it respond to me using a voice, right? Using its voice, right? That sounds weird, but using a voice. I can do text to text. I can do text to audio. I can do audio to text. I can do audio to audio. I can do text to image. I can do text to video in some cases. Like there's just one model gives you the ability to, at the very least, when something is characterized as being multimodal, at the very least, it would allow for text to text and text to image. And usually it's going to have some facility with audio based either from an input or an output perspective. And to me, we're still waiting. It's still kind of in alpha, but ChatGPT has, they've had voice-based chat for a while. And, it can work pretty well. And I've used it when, this is sad, but I've used it to have conversations about topics I was researching while I was running. So I'm on a run and I run walk. So I run for 30 seconds, then I walk for 30 seconds. And during those 30-second walks, I was like, constantly in my ear, like, talking through and researching and brainstorming with ChatGPT, via the voice interaction. And it was really capable, and it spits out a transcript at the end. Right. So if I need to go back to it, I can, but it means I don't have to stare and type while I'm running, which is just a recipe for me to fall and fail and break my head open. But their advanced voice capabilities, it honestly, I've not played with it because it's not available to me yet. But having seen some demos of it, and having looked at some of this stuff, it reminds me of the movie Her, right? It's like it is conversational, and it's kind of wild. So something else that I think is kind of interesting, and this is with the, I don't know which like, now there's like a gazillion different AirPods all of a sudden, but one of the I thought was rather interesting things that you can do with some of the AirPods, maybe all of them, maybe not, is that you can shake your head yes and shake your head no, and it will automatically understand that you're saying yes or no to Siri, right? So it's like, hey, I'm talking and I ask a question, and then rather than me having to say yes, no, you're sitting on a train, they're like, what the hell, right? Yeah, we've all been there. But now it's like, oh, I can just nod or shake my head or some variation upon that theme. And I think that's really interesting. We're trying to ease and make more comfortable and make more familiar the way that we're interacting with these solutions. And I think that further democratizes it. And that's true of general purpose society, but that's also true of our security professionals, making it more accessible and accessible from all its different various meanings, I think is really important. And that's something that we're seeing. We are, O1 preview. It's hot off the presses. It's very, very new. I think it's just a foregone conclusion that we're going to see more reasoning style models that are going to be developed. They were one of the first, but they're going to refine that when they make it like generally available, right? When it's O1, not just O1 preview, but all the other big makers are going to follow suit. And I think that's exciting because it makes it allows for much more complex reasoning processes. I can ask it to brainstorm and create a proposal and just like go through all these various steps and things like that, and have it be performed with a pretty high degree of competency. One thing that we're already benefiting from substantially is the huge explosion in context windows. As I mentioned, now it's not uncommon. Like everything that OpenAI does from a chatbot style interface has a 128,000 token context window, which is substantial. I mean, it's not Shakespeare, right? But it's really, really substantial. And even without file upload, that really makes it quite. It it makes it able to do things that it would not otherwise be able to do because it would lose the thread. It wouldn't be able to keep all of that in its memory. It wouldn't be able to analyze complex documents and things like that. And now it's just becoming more and more common. And so we have multimodal, right? We have reasoning-based models. We have a huge explosion in context window and completion window input and output tokens. And I would say the other thing, and this is already baked into a fair number of models, and it's both amazing and scary at the same time, is yes, we have retrieval augmented generation. All the big models now, with the exception of Anthropic, can interact with the web. So that old school problem of, hey, well, as of my training cutoff date of, that's much less of an issue, and you're much less likely to encounter that, because they're going to say, oh yeah, my training cutoff here, but let me go and search that web thing. And that's really cool. And, it gives it substantially more capabilities. So I've already mentioned that one, but the other one that is really, really substantial and is kind of mind-blowing is that increasingly our more substantial models have code interpreters built into them. And what this means is that even if you didn't tell the model to write code, it can recognize in certain circumstances, you know what? This isn't really just a general purpose language problem. You know what I need to do? I need to create a program, a script, and execute that script in order to achieve this end. That's one of the first ways that the models got good at math, was that they didn't try to answer math problems from just their pre-training data. They said, oh, wait, that's a math problem. You know what's good at math? Math. Math is good at math. So they would write, and it's usually Python, they would write Python code to actually perform the mathematical operations. So in some respects, this is an example of no code development. You were just using your human language, and it's creating code, and then it's also executing code, right? And that greatly extends the functionality. And, to me, it was a really logical precursor to where we now are very, very rapidly going, and some people have already gone, which is Agentic AI. So the code interpreter, that's great, but that's really just, hey, I'm going to execute code in my sandbox. I'm going to give you the results. I'm going to give you the code if you want to actually, run this on your own. And that's general purpose. These are not co-pilots or anything like that. But what that kind of hinted at is Agentic AI. And when you get to Agentic AI, what we're talking about is the ability for the models to interact with APIs largely, or to perform specific functions. So, for instance, it's stupid simple for you to get ChatGPT to write you an email, right? But the way it's going to write you an email is it's going to spit out the text, and you're going to copy pasta into your own thing. And that's cool. That's amazing, right? But you could see that it would be kind of awesome if I could just ask it to write the email, send the email, send it to my mailing list, those sorts of things. Well, they can't do that right now. The normal general purpose chatbots can't do that. That's where agentic comes in. And agentic is the idea of agents and agency. Agency is having the capability, having the wherewithal to do something. Well, with agents, the idea is that they can actually perform functions that are going to, rather than just spitting out text, rather than just spitting out an image, they're going to actually do something and make something happen. So interfacing with APIs. One of the first on this front was an open source framework called AutoGPT. And that was a cool one, and it's still out there. But now, LangChain became LangGraph, and LangGraph, it's still built on LangChain. LangChain was kind of one of the first tools that was really, hey, open source, you want to do retrieval augmented generation on your own with your own application, do that. LangGraph is now going more agentic and multi-agent. A really interesting platform that I think is very, very accessible for anyone with, I won't say no code, but low code. You can do low code development of a multi-agent system, is a platform called Crew.ai. So Crew.ai it's really wild. It's really tremendous. And you can basically, just with natural language, you can build these various agents. So a classic example of this, let's say I want to research a topic, decide what would be an interesting blog post. And then, I don't want to actually, I want it to write the blog post too. So I'm going to have an agent that does research, that interfaces, that's trying to determine, well, what are some possible topics that would be relevant in this space to my audience. And then that's great. Then it can feed it off to a separate agent that is not concerned about like searching the web and looking for popularity and seeing what are the latest and greatest, what are trending YouTube, what's trending on TikTok, what's trending on this. That's great. That's one agent can do this. A different agent can be like the writer. So it's going to write, it's going to spit out, clean copy that's well written. It's then going to pass it off to an editor. And the editor agent is going to check grammar. It's going to check for clarity. It's going to check for readability. All the basic grammar and spell check things are going to be done at a high level. And then we could directly pass it off to an agent that's going to, upload this and, send this to a GitHub repo which is the back end for our static site builder. And like, that's just a trivial example of what is becoming more directly accessible through nothing but natural language programming. I don't have to know code substantially to be able to do almost any of that nowadays, and it's pretty mind-boggling what the capabilities are. And a lot of researchers that I think are very interesting consider the agentic AI applications to really be, that's the most significant game changer that's happening right now. Like early on, after ChatGPT kind of debuted in November 2022, a lot of 23 and some of 24 has been more capable models. And that's been tremendous. But Andrew Ng of deeplearning.ai, he has talked about like the next wave of really significant, vast improvements and capabilities is really in the agentic AI avenue, right? Figuring out how to do more. These models are great, but being able to actually do things and make changes and do a fair amount of automation is pretty tremendous.
Yeah, that's an incredible list of new things. I didn't know about some of that stuff, and so I'm both impressed, scared, and excited all at the same time.
As we all should be. As we all should be.
Any short list of resources that you could rattle off that people might want to hit in terms of like if they're at the front end of this and they will want to take a basic like free online class or website read or whatever just get started on this journey?
Totally. There are some really solid courses on Coursera that are available for free. One from, I'm going to blank on his name. He's a professor out of Vanderbilt. This is one of the first prompt engineering classes that I took, was a Coursera course on prompt engineering that professor at Vanderbilt created. I am a huge fan. I just mentioned deeplearning.ai. Deeplearning.ai, it's actually Andrew Ng, big luminary, like he's now on the board of directors of Amazon. He's machine learning AI professor. He was at Stanford for a lot of years. I think he's technically still an associate professor. He also created Coursera, which is kind of interesting. And the reason he created Coursera was because he had a machine learning class that he wanted to make available to everybody. He wanted to democratize AI. And he's like, machine learning, it's awesome if you come to Stanford and take it from me, but that's not within everybody's capabilities, or most people can't afford that. Most people can't get in. Most people, like all that stuff. And so he has, he built Coursera to offer what now has morphed into his machine learning specialization. You can do it on Coursera, and that's great. And he built that and created that. But he runs deeplearning.ai, and they have pretty much all the Coursera stuff. The content is all available for free on deeplearning.ai, and a whole bunch of other courses. Now, I would say that more often than not, the deeplearning.ai stuff, it's oriented towards, there's going to be code, there's going to be math, there's going to be machine learning, there's going to be algorithms under the hood. So, it is not your entry level, hey, let me first figure out what's going on here. On that front, there is a book from Manning that I really liked, from Manning Publications. I think it's Introducing Generative AI, but it's from Manning Publications, and it was a really thought-provoking and fairly accessible introduction to kind of the landscape and where it's come from and where it's going and kind of ideas. And I found that to be very accessible. But I'd say, to me, the first thing that most people should do is start playing with it and start digging into figuring out how to be better at prompting. And the prompt engineering information out there, you can go to Learn Prompting is another resource that's got they've got some courses, but they've also got a nice, well thought of cheat sheet that's kind of a repository for different knowledge and styles of prompt engineering. I'm a huge fan of it's actually an AI security company called Lakera, Lakera. And the way that a lot of people found out about them is through their Gandalf. So they have Gandalf, which is a prompt injection capture the flag. So it's a prompt interface, and there are many levels. And the idea is you're going to provide an input that is going to satisfy some criteria. So one of the most basic things is, it's been told not to say a particular word, and you've got to convince it to say this word. Okay, well then it's going to get it to say this word, but you can't actually use that word, and just all sorts of different variations, and there's tons of different levels, and it's a really interesting. It's an interesting introduction to prompt injection and kind of seeing like what in the world is potentially possible through this natural language interface. But I think it also can give you a sense as to just some of the capabilities that our models have these days. Because I remember one of the levels, and spoiler alert, one of the levels, the way to beat it, the way that I beat it anyway, was that I took my prompt and I translated it to a different language that I had no idea what it was. I went to Google Translate, translated it to like Swahili or something like that, and then supplied it as a prompt. Well, the system message, the filtering and the protection was all built on English. And so you asked it in a different language, and it's like, oh yeah, sure, I can totally do that. And I told it in Swahili. Well, Google Translate told it in Swahili. Oh yeah, and by the way, I need you to respond to me in English. Made it work. And then whatever. So just those sorts of things that you naturally wouldn't stumble upon that. You're going into a prompt engineering class. You're not going to be like, oh my gosh, let me think about, translating to a totally different language, or let me think about, telling it to encode it, or telling it to, craft this particular format. But I think the combination of introduction of prompt engineering and prompt injection is a really good way to start to see some of the capabilities that might exist in this front. Now, you can get much deeper with it at so many levels, but that's probably where I would really start, and then see which threads you want to pull on, right? Because there's so much out there, whether you want to dive into actually building, agentic AI applications, whether you want to, figure out how to better train or better interface with models, or, protect models using like, Purple Llama or something like that. Just there's so much out there that is relevant to, well, everybody, but it's also certainly relevant to security professionals. Totally have to give a shout out, because it was my real first attempt, was 595. Sec 595 with Dave Holter, data science, machine learning, AI, some variation upon that theme. It's just a tremendous class. Dave is an absolute just stellar author and instructor. And if you want to remember a lot of math that you forgot, that's a great way of doing it. And this is pretty recent, hot off the presses, I'm actually creating for SANS some new AI related content. So I am in the process of building out a AI security essentials class for SANS that, still to be determined when it's going to debut, but I've been geeking out over this stuff for a year and a half now plus. And I've not gotten unexcited. I just keep on geeking out, and there's more and more and more. And I really do think it's a significant game changer for the world, for the industry. And it's not going to replace all the humans. It's not going to subvert all the humans, but there's a lot of utility that can be gained through something that understands language. And that's really basically what this is associated with. So I'm excited to be writing that class. I have already added AI related content to Sec 511. So if you're thinking about, how and some of the touch points of AI and security operations, that's really the focus of the 511 content is, What's the attack surface associated with these LLM applications? How do you protect them? How do you defend them? How do you detect attacks against them? Those sorts of things, as well as some of the fundamentals.
I'm really excited to see what's going to come out of that class and see the new stuff in 5.11, because I mean, clearly you're deep into this, and
I love it,
especially as a result of this conversation, I'd continually refired up about diving into this. Final question, something a little different than the previous ones. To wrap it up, I think one thing that I think would put a good cap on this, you mentioned several times that this is traditionally, like in your background, this was not anything you ever learned right from the start. And a lot of people are very intimidated by this stuff. But I think it's a really important point to kind of like specifically highlight. It's like you pushed your way through and you found your way from, learning philosophy all into being an expert in AI and cybersecurity, right? Not an easy thing to do, but for people who are looking at this and say, oh, I could never do that. I could never get where Seth is. Do you have any tactics or other kind of mindset that you use to learn these tough new things when they show up?
One thing that I've always been blessed with, and I guess that's kind of somewhat telling from my BS in philosophy, is I love to read, and I'm constantly reading lots of different stuff, and that's just internet sites, that's news sites, tech news sites. So I think having a voracious appetite is a really, really useful skill. And it allows you to level up and to continue to level up. It's great to take a class to learn some specific skill, but said before, the thing you love or hate about security is that it never ever stops. If you take a break for 3 months, man, there's a lot that's changed. There's a lot of tactics that have changed. There's a lot of new out there, and that's something that I love about security, is that it's a constant churn of new capabilities, new tools, new defenses, new attacks, and AI is even like more so. So it's like a kid in a candy store. But I think playing and being inquisitive, and I don't know, just try to tap into something that excites you. Because if it excites you, then, if you're geeking out over it, you're like, oh man, that's so awesome. You're much more likely to glom on. And so for me, that's being excited about it, like from that very first foray of like, oh my gosh, how did he hack all the things in the world from a freaking printer? Like I've been geeking out for more than 20 years now. And it hasn't slowed down. It's never more exciting than it is right now. And that's always been the case. It's always been something that's excited me. So, truthfully, I think more than anything, it is intimidating. It is absolutely intimidating. There's just so much out there that we don't know. Like, I am utterly humbled every single time I go and try to learn anything. It's like, oh wow, yep. I feel like I got ignorant in the background. You know nothing, Seth Misenar, right? Just constantly, because I feel like I have always felt like an imposter because I have this philosophy background, and it's like, oh my gosh, how dare I play in the same space with these people? But the reality is that, look, if it excites you, if it energizes you, it is so much easier to just dig into it because it's fun. And there's a lot. Security is so broad and AI is so broad that there is something in there that's going to excite you. There is absolutely something, whether it's like hacking all the things or, investigating all the things or defending all the things. Like, there is something that is just going to make you grin. And if you got that, if you find yourself grinning while you're learning about something, you've found maybe not a calling, but you've found something that is really worthy of your time, and that's going to improve your quality of life just on so many levels. And so, to me, it's find something you love, find something that's really interesting to you. And this can be a hobby, this can be a side hustle. This doesn't have to be your main gig, but if you love it long enough, then it's going to absolutely end up being your main gig, because there's more than enough need to go around for sure, and there always will be.
I love that. And I love that you touched on the imposter syndrome thing too. I know everyone kind of feels that way and has some kind of inkling towards that at some point in their career, if not completely constantly. So it's always good to hear people who are top of the game saying that kind of thing, realizing that we all sort of feel that way. And then of course just the advice of try to make it fun, push your way through it, and you'll get there. Love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. I think that's a perfect place to end it up. So thank you, Seth, so much for joining me on Blueprint. Awesome conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
A ton of links. I'm going to put all of those things in the show notes and we will get them out to everyone.
Outstanding. Thanks, Sean. Love what you're doing here. And yeah, I really appreciate you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Whew. Now that was awesome. I don't know about you, but I love this discussion with Seth. It really paints the picture of not only the future of meaningful help from AI, but also one that isn't filled with doom and gloom and AI overlords taking our jobs and running the world. Seth mentioned a ton of stories and links and more, and I made sure to capture all of those and put it in the show notes so you don't miss out on that. If you're looking for more on this topic, be sure to follow Seth on social media and pay attention to the new SANS courses that will be coming out on these topics. We are iterating and creating new info for you as fast as we can, and there's a lot of change happening in this area, as you might imagine. I put a link to Seth's teaching schedule, the cyber defense class list, and more in the show notes as well. I hope you all gained a deeper understanding of AI not only as a capability, but some of the direction that it's going to be taking in the near future and what you can do to stay ahead of it. I know I did. Again, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.